thought the Speaker was on something with the sixth form. It just felt like, the last day of term. And it feels a bit like Parliament has slightly run out of it. They feel like it should be the last day of term. Everyone's waiting for the election.
Yeah.
There's no sense of this is business as usual anymore. This is all. Everyone's a little bit demob happy. They're planning their life after the election.
And it's all a bit election slogan. Let's turn our attention to, because I was really keen to get your take on this, because people say they hate all the yarboo of Westminster and PMQs and all that, and other people say they like it. And as someone who's been there and sat there and probably made some noise, I want to get your take on this. This was the Commons Speaker Lindsay Hoyle yesterday telling off MPs during PMQs.
But it's crystal clear. There's one party that's going to deliver tax cuts for working Britain, and it's the Conservative Party.
But that was a long ramble. Order. Whoever's banging the furniture will have to pay for your damages. Can we have less of it? We are not at the sixth form now. Come on,
So the most notable was that Lindsay Hoyle seems to have got his mojo back after a few weeks of piping down. I hadn't really noticed someone doing the... they normally save that for the 1922 committee.
Yeah, well, you've got tables in the 1922 committees, so it's quite easy to bang them. I'm just picturing myself back on the backbenches and trying to think what I would bang. So it's a bit like a church.
Bottoms again.
I was going to say, what were you banging on the backbenches?
Well, there's a sort of pew in front of you, so I suppose
you could
you'd
do
hurt
that.
your hand if you hit it too hard.
You do get in some sort of venues, people would do that with their feet. You get a bit of that. When I've been to the X Factor
That's
finals,
when you've got a
people
glass
do
of
that.
champagne in your hand.
Yes, exactly.
So you have to stamp your feet.
Yeah. Is it
getting so elite.
I was going to say, you've done this before.
Is it getting worse, Matthew? Take us back to when you were there in the 80s.
No, it was always like that. In fact, I was advised to listen to PMQs as an example of particularly disorderly day. It wasn't particularly disorderly. It's always like that. And it's almost part of the Speaker's ceremonial routine to shout, "Order, order." Remember, John Bercow was always doing it. And I can even remember Mr. Speaker Thomas shouting himself hoarse. It's hard to explain this in a way that I think listeners would understand or sympathise with, but when you're in it and everybody is shouting, and there really is a sort of gladiatorial contest between two people, and you're on the side of one of them and other people are on the side of the other, it's probably like a football match. It is very hard not just to get carried away and start shouting yourself. I'm sure I have. Yeah. It's dreadful.
And what is the art of doing it? Because there's an art to doing it and not being spotted by the Speaker.
Yes.
Were you a particularly noisy?
No, I wasn't particularly noisy, and I was never one of those people kind of in the foreground. There are certainly people... Well, the first art, of course, is not to sit anywhere near the Speaker.
Yeah.
So sit as far away as you can from the Speaker and try not to move your mouth, I suppose, would be. So you just go, like that.
Like when people at school would just start humming.
Yes.
And the teacher wouldn't know. It's just going...
They can't tell it's you. Is it harder with cameras? Has that changed?
What, like VAR?
Well, like VAR, but now that it's all televised.
People thought that the cameras would civilise
everyone forgets.
people, but it didn't make any difference at all, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, try civilising Westminster.
What do you think, Manveen? Is it all... Because whenever people say... It's a bit like when people say they just want good news. Well, they don't want good news at all. It's just a thing for people to say. When people say they don't want the yarboo.
Yeah, this is like Cameron coming in and saying we're done with Punch and Judy politics. Nobody ever is. Politics gets even duller when people are done with Punch and Judy politics and doesn't last for very long. I think the reason it sort of sounded kind of loud and unruly yesterday was because we've had a quieter few weeks, and it just had that. I thought the Speaker was on something with the sixth form. It just felt like the last day of term, and it feels a bit like Parliament has slightly run out of it. They feel like it should be the last day of term. Everyone's waiting for the election.
Yeah.
There's no sense of this is business as usual anymore. This is all. Everyone's a little bit demob happy. They're planning their life after the election.
And it's all a bit election slogans rather than interrogating.
There's no big
because
it was very lively around, let's say, the Brexit debates. But again, there was an issue there.
Yeah.
This is kind of the lack of an issue is making them quite. It's all quite febrile because there's nothing to be talking about.
Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer were both talking demonstrable rubbish. So you know,
it was
they were talking about
vacuous.
national insurance. The Tories have not said where they're going to get the money to cut national insurance, and Keir Starmer was suggesting that it was all going to come from cuts to public services. But the fact is, what you have to do is abolish national insurance and put a couple of pence onto income tax.
And then there's winners and
the only
losers
way
and
to
all
do
that.
it.
In the last few moments, Scotland's longest-serving Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, has launched his SNP leadership bid.
Thank you for joining me at the Grassmarket Community Project, a venture that brings hope to some of the most vulnerable people in our society in the setting of a social enterprise. This place reflects my values, who I am, and it's therefore the right place for me to confirm that I intend to stand for election as leader of the Scottish National Party. I want to build on the work of the SNP government to create a modern, diverse, dynamic Scotland that will ensure opportunity for all of her citizens. I want to unite the SNP and unite Scotland for independence.
So that is the John Swinney launching his leadership bid for the SNP with the slogan, Unite for Independence. Do you think that's going to work, Matthew?
I suppose you don't have to have hair to be in politics, do you? It'll
It's an
probably.
interesting question, though. When was the last time?
Well, Churchill didn't have much hair.
No.
That's true.
That's the last one.
I think it is. Yes,
Has our attitude to hair changed since then, though?
Can we have a bold...
I don't know. Well, William Hague, I suppose, was the next one. Didn't work
Wasn't
out.
very successful.
Can we even say bald
work
anymore? I don't know.
Follically challenged.
I feel like this is why you're here, Matthew, to zero in on the thing that people won't have thought about, but now will become obsessed with.
No. I mean, there have genuinely been studies done on hairstyles and whether they win an election, how much of a difference that makes. And so Blair, I remember, sort of got his hair cut at one point, and people went mad because psephologists have studied this, and apparently it does have an impact. So if hairstyle has an impact, then presumably being bald would too.
I hadn't really thought of this. On the well, obviously, yeah, but Neil Kinnock didn't do him any good, did it? Didn't do William Hague any good.
No.
Well,
I think we're onto something.
They need to consider this. On the substance, what he's basically trying to do is put together the ragtag coalition of people in Scotland who don't agree on very much apart from independence. And so Unite for Independence is don't worry about all the other stuff. We'll stop talking about trans things, or stop talking about green things, or stop, we'll just talk about independence.
That's sort of the problem, though, isn't it? I mean, the SNP has been such an odd party for a very long time. You know, they started off with like the Tartan Tories and anyone who was pro-independence. But in the meantime, under that label, they've sort of become very, very left-wing, very sort of progressive and liberal. And that doesn't bring all of the party with them. But actually, I mean, the party doesn't seem to like Kate Forbes much for exactly that reason, because it is, you know, she is anti sort of slightly woke, and you know, her values aren't sort of in line with the Nicola Sturgeon agenda. So the SNP don't seem to like her, but she's doing better in terms of polls with the rest of the country. So maybe they're not broad enough for a coalition. I don't know. I think as a party, it doesn't feel very sustainable.
And you wrote in the Times this week, Matthew, you're launching Gays for Kate Forbes. Explain
Absolutely.
that.
Well, you know, they say she's homophobic. I see no evidence of that. She belongs to a church. She's a keen churchgoer, and she said that she wouldn't have voted for gay marriage. A lot of people didn't vote for gay marriage. You can have your own views on gay marriage, and I don't think that we gays should be whimpering like victims any longer. We've won all these battles. She has said that she would never revisit the legislation. Fine, let's draw a line under it. Is she going to be a good leader of the party? And there's every evidence that she has what so many people in Scottish politics seem to lack, which is basic competence in administration.
Well, indeed, in any politics.
Yes.
I remember because she was very young when she first became the finance minister.
She still is.
And then she's a great communicator. I remember sort of first hearing on some panel shows and interviews and that sort of thing. And you thought she did have that, she appeared to have the thing that lots of people don't. That when they're speaking, you sort of sit up and take notice. You sort of slightly turn up the dial rather than turning it down.
And she's very smart. I met her a few months ago, and she's a lovely person, very smart. I think because of that, and because people sort of sit up and listen to what she's saying, they're often surprised by her views, just because you don't often hear them expressed in modern politics. She is quite old-fashioned in a lot of her opinions, I guess. I think she was brought up by missionaries. She's very much guided by her religion, which I think, again, people find it awkward to talk about in modern politics. So I think people don't know what to make of her, but she clearly has something about her which makes her quite a successful politician. She's just finding her constituency, I think.
You're dead right that she expresses things that you don't often hear expressed, but they're often thoughts or feelings widely felt. There's this quality of honesty and directness about her. But
that's what I mean. I feel like she's looking for her constituency. I think there are people who think like that, but they're not necessarily SNP voters at the moment.
Yeah.
So she's a slightly different brand, and would do well if she was leading a party. I'm just not sure if this is the party for her, or if the SNP is due a massive change.
Time for her.
And that's that, I suppose, is the challenge, isn't it? Is that she might agree with them on the question of independence, but if the party has moved as far as it has to the left on.
That's the problem with having independence as your guiding light.
Yeah.
Actually, everything else can be so completely different. It was hijacked by Nicola Sturgeon and turned into a very left-wing party. Before that, it hadn't always been. You'd had that sort of brand of Tartan Tory who was basically a Tory but wanted independence. I don't think they feel necessarily at home in the SNP at the moment.
You get the feeling that Kate Forbes wouldn't bang on about independence quite as much as the others, and would bang on a bit more about competence. But I've spoken to a couple of supporters of hers who are not sure this is the right time for her to become leader of the party. Either best not to stand, or if stand, best to lose again narrowly.
That's interesting.
Because they're in for a really rough ride and bad election results.
The parallels with what's happened in Westminster, and that just the very act of changing leader again does cause you damage. Doesn't matter who it is, and then the act of having to clear up from the last two's problems.
But also, I think Matthew's right. If she's a serious potential leader, you don't want to come in at a time where the party's about to be decimated at an election. It's too late to turn anything around. Whereas with the Tories, you've got that odd moment where I think a lot of them are so worried about losing their seats at the election that it's worth being Prime Minister for a couple of months. It's worth being the Lady Jane Grey, the Liz Truss of politics, because you'll still get maybe a book deal, a pretty bad one, and maybe a speaking gig or two in America if you get to say you're a Prime Minister for 3 months. But if you're Kate Forbes and you seriously want to lead a party and you want to be a serious politician, would you want to become leader just as the party's about to be decimated and you become the person associated with that loss?
And I suppose that's the thing, is that, just getting Prime Minister, First Minister on your CV is one thing. Actually, if you think you're the person who can break up a country
Different
and
thing.
be the person who delivers that's an enormous challenge.